What an El Clásico it was. The first of the season, Real Madrid 2, Barcelona 1. I mean, that only really slightly hints at all the stuff that happened in the match, as is normal, David. The score never really truly describes it. It's funny, though, because it broke a little run of what had been happening in El Clásico. 4 editions last season, Barcelona won them all. They score a ton of goals in that time as well. And so this score, if it doesn't completely describe what happened, what it did describe is the fact that Xabi Alonso, in his first Clásico, managed to get at least a level of control for Real Madrid in this fixture that they haven't had in actually quite a long time.
Absolutely. And across those games, I believe the aggregate score was 16-7. So it wasn't just a manner of Ancelotti and Real Madrid losing those Clásicos. They did so in emphatic fashion. So this game was always going to be, and I said this on Ask OTC last week, this was always going to be a good measure of where Real Madrid with Xabi Alonso are at. And I think we saw that they're in a good place moving forward, and not everything is perfect, but this was a great marker down just to let Barca know that they're not going to have all their own way in these games or in La Liga overall.
Yeah, I think in terms of the competitiveness of La Liga, it's probably the result as a neutral. And I know obviously a lot of people who watch this game and are listening to this will probably not be. But in terms of neutrality, if you're just watching it as a slightly removed observer, which is, I guess, difficult to be in this situation, it's actually a great result for the league, isn't it? Because not only do Real Madrid hit back against what was the prevailing flow of this fixture, as we said, but also it sets up the league really nicely. I mean, it gives Real Madrid a 5-point lead, which is not a 5-point lead is not going to be decisive at this point in the season. But if you go from the default point where you see last season's games overall, La Liga in general, not just El Clásico, I think a lot of people could assume that financial issues notwithstanding, Barcelona are probably ready to grasp the nettle, both in La Liga and maybe in the Champions League as well, leaning into a rivalry with PSG that kind of felt that it should have been the final last year, and that it is coming. Maybe the fact that they're going to play each other for a few seasons in a row, and it might be a big battle in European football. And that's remarkable in itself, because Real Madrid, we sort of think of them as, you know, the European Cup / Champions League is their competition and everyone else is playing in it. And all of a sudden, they're going to the back of the minds of European football fans. It feels like they've come from a position of dominance in 2024. So all of a sudden, they've got a lot to do to keep themselves competitive. Now, all of a sudden, they're like, well, hang on. Actually, we're going to buy it back. And even a couple of weeks ago, David, this didn't feel like it was possible. They started the season in quite promising fashion under Xabi Alonso, but first proper test they have against Atletico, they get absolutely hammered. And going back to your theme of before, they concede a ton of goals. So this, not just as a marker for the season, but for a marker in terms of we are competitive and we can be competitive, is absolutely crucial, no?
Oh, 100%. I think there was a general feeling, and I'm glad you've brought that Atleti game up. There's a general feeling that the big test that Xabi Alonso has faced so far, he's failed in, and Real Madrid's shortcomings have really been brought to the fore. I'm talking about in the Club World Cup. And of course, I'm talking about that Atleti game, and the manner of the defeat in that Atleti game was emphatic as well. So they really needed a performance here, to prove to Barca, I think to prove to Atleti, the rest of the Liga as well, and just generally just to prove that they're on the right track. They were so far off under Ancelotti in these big games. And they needed to show here that Xabi Alonso's work is setting in, it is clicking for the players. And I think it did. This was an impressive performance. And like I said about Real Madrid right now, but Barcelona's the same. Everything's not perfect, but it feels as though Real Madrid are on the right track on the evidence of this performance.
I guess the interesting thing, if we're talking about the flow of this game, to me, is the fact that the one thing, and we talked about it with what happened against Atletico, with the amount of goals that they conceded in the Clásicos last season, as you said, 16. The fact that the one thing that Xabi Alonso needed to sort out from the get-go, and you can see it with the signings that they made, of course, that were defenders, the defence needed sorting out. Now, of course, they've had a few defensive injuries again, but it felt like collectively they defended really well in this game. Of course, Barcelona have the advantage in possession, as you would expect. But in terms of meaningful chances, it didn't feel like Thibaut Courtois had to have the game of his life. It felt that collectively they defended really, really well. Now, we can talk about the defence and defensive personnel, but actually a lot of the flack that was directed at Real Madrid last season, there was always a question of could they defend collectively, as in from the front. And this was sort of augmented by the fact, and we'll come on to Kylian Mbappé in a minute, I guess, the fact that it felt as if Mbappé and Vinícius Júnior weren't pulling their weight defensively. Is this changing a little bit?
Slightly so. There's still a lot.
Cautious.
There's still, I'm going to be extremely cautious here. Look, it's still a work in progress for them to understand these things as well, that they need to do this for the good of the collective. And I'm sure once it clicks and once they realize, if I do this, look, everything else kind of falls into place behind me in the midfield and defence. There's some instances where they do seem to be tuned in to doing so, and then there's other instances where they're not, which I completely understand. And more often than not, it's, you're relying on Bellingham, you're relying on the midfield to press, to provide that high intensity kind of aggression that they need to shut down. And it was notable in this game, I think, that Xabi Alonso decided the main feature of it in terms of a system was he decided to sacrifice a winger. They were essentially 4-4-2 out of possession. And the main aim of Real Madrid's game, aside from their own attacking output, was to put pressure on the two Barca centre-backs in Eric Garcia and Pau Cubarsí. There's a general feeling that Hansi Flick really likes putting them two together because of how adept they are on the ball, how they can move it out of defence, and they can, they allow Barca to move out in a certain shape. The thing is with those two, they can be pressured. They can, be forced into errors, mistakes. I think we've seen a lot of mistakes.
They've both got a mistake in them, 100%.
100%, yeah. Especially Eric Garcia, who I think, who I really do like. I think is a very gifted player. He has made a lot of high-profile errors that I can certainly think of. So Real Madrid looked to do this and press from the front, and it worked a treat. And hindsight's a wonderful thing, but looking back on it, you do think, in this type of Clásico where it's going to be aggressive, it's going to be intense, I think you want Araujo starting these games. He's a defender made for El Clásico, in my opinion.
It's a funny thing, isn't it, with Araujo, because you look at him and obviously he had that long spell out with injury, which clearly affected his place in the hierarchy. And maybe he's gradually started to get that back. But I think, and not just because of the winner against Girona last week, I remember Tim Vickery talking about for Uruguay, it really affected the way that they played, because he is we think of him as a defender's defender, but actually he's a playmaker of a defender as well. So he can do that bit of the game that you're describing. But Cubarsí, I think it's easy to forget what a young player he is. And the fact that he's not the finished article, he does make mistakes. Why would he not make mistakes at that age? Why would he be the finished article? And this, I agree with you, felt like a game where he could have done with someone experienced next to him. Yep. So not only talking about what you were talking, maybe they should have started Araujo. Is this another of those moments this season? And there've been a few where you think I really miss Inigo Martinez, who was one of the unsungs from last season. Oh,
absolutely. And look, he's another one. He's very, very good on the ball, but he's more aggressive. He's more physical. He leans into the old Sergio Ramos, Carles Puyol sort of mold. So they're good on the ball, but they're also very aggressive, and they're just made for these intense Clásico games. And yeah, I think it was a big absence. And look, if you look at all the great defenders in history, they've always had a very, very good partner who complements them. And it doesn't mean that they have to be on the same level as a footballer as them. It just means they need to complement them. Every great partnership has that. And I think Barca's no different. And I do think this should be the end of the Eric Garcia, Pau Cubarsí experiment, because they just don't complement each other. Individually, with another centre-back, I think they both can be very good and very adept, but they just don't work together.
I mean, obviously, you've made me feel very sad there, because by mentioning Sergio Ramos and Carles Puyol in the same sentence, I'm thinking all of a sudden, what is even the point of having El Clasico without those two involved?
It still doesn't feel right for me. It's so far since those days, and maybe we're just both nostalgia merchants, mate, and we need to get with it. But yeah, I do miss them. I miss them greatly. I miss all the characters from those games. I miss your Pepes, obviously, and people like that. They really made it. Those were peak classical years. We're never getting that level back.
No, we're not. Look, we'll get onto the baiting and the chip and the fighting and all that sort of stuff later, because this had plenty of it, especially in the back end. It almost felt as if they were coming off the pitch and thinking, yeah, we haven't had a proper kickoff yet. Maybe we should deal with that before we leave the field. It's like part of the El Clasico contract.
Yeah, I was going to say, respect the elders.
Yeah, exactly. bit of a tribute act. It's like Justin Timberlake getting Janet Jackson on or whatever, isn't it? But like, I think we've got to look at the tail of the tape from earlier on. And even though we talked about Madrid defending really well collectively, they had a lot of bite in that opening first half hour. It looks like Mbappé has opened the scoring with what's an unbelievable finish from outside the box. Is chalked off because he's just offside. Just straight back on the horse. Mbappé opens the scoring himself. And what impressed me so much is not just the way that they grab the ball by the horns, but when Fermin equalises from a great delivery again by Marcus Rashford, leaning into the fact that he's a really good part of that collective even at this early stage in the season, partly probably because of the Rafinha injury, because he's standing in for him at the moment. But when Fermin scores, and it feels not outrageously against the run of play, but it didn't feel as if it was coming, I think it's fair to say, that Real Madrid don't let it affect them. They don't let it knock them off course. They don't let it change the game plan. Jude Bellingham scores the winner just before half-time. We'll come to Bellingham in a moment. Even at this early point in the season, what a campaign Kylian Mbappé is having. In terms of leadership as much as anything else.
Absolutely phenomenal. It looks like the shirt isn't really a weight on him anymore. It feels like it fits. And yeah, he's running with that. Essentially, and don't get me wrong, he got slammed for his first year at Real Madrid, but it's still a pretty decent goals and assist return. I just think it's because there was
numbers wise, it's incredible.
Yeah, there was such a few high profile moments. There was obviously the now infamous game at Anfield in the Champions League, and I think that's still in people's kind of psyche when they think about Kylian Mbappé, and it's natural. It's against a Premier League team. It's more widely viewed. People get their views from that. Okay, but he's done very, very well, and we've discussed the press, and we've discussed the intensity from the forward line he needs to provide to help his team defend and be part of a unit, and that is starting to click for him. He's starting to build more relationships with the players as well, and which I think is also vitally important, that he needs a relationship with somebody who can always identify his runs and his movement, which is always absolutely flawless, I think. And he was unfortunate on the penalty, of course, but in terms of his game, he looks a very, very big player right now, and moving forward, it is going to be pretty much, Bellingham and Mbappe as the two keys, and they seem like right now the two faces of this team.
Yeah, while you're talking about Mbappe, I think we should have a quick word for Wojciech Szczesny, who I know when a player misses a penalty, especially even when it's on target, we often look at the penalty taker and attribute him to him and say it's his fault. That is an amazing penalty save from Szczesny, because he's dived past it actually and he manages to stop it with his left hand. It's an unbelievable save.
The readjustment's really impressive. I always think if you can do in mid-action, if you can readjust to do something like that, I think it's really, really quick train of thought. Really, really smart.
Yeah, it is. But let's move on to Jude Bellingham, because it's been an incredible week for him. And we were talking about the fact that Real Madrid have defended really well collectively, and I think they did that really well against Juventus actually. Eder Militao was outstanding in that game, I thought, and Dean Huyson was able to come back into the team for the Clásico, and that obviously really helped them as well, him being able to step up. And I think the interesting thing about it though is maybe it's because they've started to defend well again, but they've found the right place for Jude Bellingham all of a sudden. Now, you look at the two winning goals, you think, yeah, of course, it's been a great week for him. Now, on the other hand, there'll be people who look at the highlights, having not watched the entire thing, who think, yeah, but they're two tap-ins. I think the point is he's getting himself in those advanced positions, and it's something we saw against Juventus as well. The fact that he almost has this free role, and it's something that Xabi Alonso has talked about with players before. I interviewed him when he was at Leverkusen, as I mentioned before, and he was saying to me that, you know, tactics, people can get obsessed with the tactical shape. And in fact, like if you're starting like 3-5-2, 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3, whatever, it's just the framework. And I have to empower the players to make the right decisions and interpret the roles as they see fit. And it feels to me already like Jude Bellingham is really benefiting from Xabi Alonso. If we go back to when they played away at Getafe last weekend, he was taking up loads of advanced positions in different places. Then you look at Juventus, and he takes positions up where he's like a second striker to Mbappé, where he pops up on the right, where he pops up on the left, where he makes late runs into the box, like he did to finish off the winning goal against Juventus, where you think it's the magic by Vinícius, which it is. It's an amazing moment to open it up, but Bellingham has to be there in that position. And maybe in previous incarnations of Madrid, particularly in the back end of last season, he doesn't find himself in this position. Does it feel as if Alonso has cracked the Jude Bellingham code?
I think so. I think something's definitely been found with him. And I just want to go back to your first point as well. That's a really, really great point from Xabi Alonso about formations and framework, because how often do you see people fuming about when they see their lineup out on a Saturday and they're like, oh, he's gone for 4-3-3 again. I can't believe it. Why are we playing 4-3-3? But it's very rarely that, isn't it? There's always room for interpretation, and certain players have certain roles that allow them to drift and move. So in regards to Bellingham, yes, it was noticeable here against Barcelona. He popped up on the outside. When he just drifted out to the left when he wanted to, but he also played centrally, and I do really like him centrally. I think that's where he's the most important. But he did some excellent work from wide areas as well. So he has, and we talk a lot when we talk about Real Madrid and what they need, and Xabi Alonso, we say, oh, they need unity, they need to be a collective. If there's one player who is allowed that, you know, a free role, that free to roam, it is Jude Bellingham.
He can't be tamed.
Yeah, he cannot be tamed, and you should not be tamed. I'm anti-taming Bellingham. I keep hearing all the time that he needs to be tamed. You know, he's a bit aggressive, a bit, like, you know, mouthy sometimes and everything like that. And then also he's just his actual role as well. And I'm like, no, let Jude be Jude. Is kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, exactly. I know they're very different types of player, David, but it feels to me that a lot of discussions that we have in English fandom and media about Jude Bellingham are a lot of the discussions we had about Wayne Rooney 100%. When he was a similar age.
It's so similar. It's striking. The parallels between the two are incredible, just on so many levels. And you've got to allow players who are as good as Bellingham a bit of extra slack, a bit of extra leeway.
Agreed.
He's so influential, and look, he had that shoulder surgery in July. It's been slow and steady, just waiting for him to settle back into the team, because they did rush him back. He's so keen to get him back, and I think Real Madrid's start to life under Xabi Alonso not being overly, impressive, kind of, hasten them to bring him back a bit quicker, which was a bit unfortunate. But they've been a bit more, it's been gradual in terms of where we are right now with Jude Bellingham. And we're seeing shades of year one Jude in Real Madrid.
Yes.
It reminds me of it so much, because it's about being in the right place at the right time. And you've got to remember, in that first year, how many big goals in certain places he popped up with. I'm thinking of like in Bilbao with San Mamés and such. And I think I made a joke at the time. I was like, is somebody writing a script for his movie here? Because he just kept getting the big goals at the big stadiums, in the big moments, the late goals, key goals. And it was extraordinary. He's getting that sort of thing back right now. And that's huge for Real Madrid, who do need leaders. I think it's really important for them to find leaders.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to look at it from too much of an Anglophile perspective here, but it does feel that sometimes when we're talking about the arrival of Kylian Mbappé at the club, we were looking at it the wrong way round, really, because we were always having that discussion. And world football, it seems, was having this discussion about how do you fit Mbappé and Vinícius in the same team. And actually, as time's gone by, it's proved that was the wrong question. It was like, how do you find the connection between Mbappé and Bellingham. And that's something actually that round about Christmas time last year, they did a lot better. I think if you look at the first 3 months of the season, we've quoted this before, they were exchanging the ball, I think 1.3, 1.4 times per game. And that went up to about 4 or 5 by December, January. And that they almost put Bellingham in this sort of, Ancelotti had a more prescriptive formation, I think it's fair to say, than Alonso. And he was sort of playing in this sort of like left second striker role almost. And Vinícius being out injured for some of the time helped with that. So I guess, firstly, I would say that was important. Secondly, I guess as we see this burgeoning relationship and the burgeoning influence of Mbappé and Bellingham, where does this leave Vinny Júnior? Again, he had a strop when he was taken off. And I think we've seen in the last year, and I was talking before about, are him and Mbappé pressing from the front better? It feels to me that pre-Mbappé, Vinícius pressed from the front a lot better. I remember we were talking about this, and Roberto De Zerbi last season was showing Mason Greenwood videos of Vinícius, and he goes, this is how he can be a star player and actually work off the ball. It doesn't feel like he does any of that anymore, or does it to a far lesser extent. He had this drop when he went off. Now, the way Alonso reacted to it was quite phlegmatic, in the way you would expect him to be. That feels a very Xabi Alonso reaction. He said, look, let's just enjoy the win and we'll discuss the other stuff later. But it's a pain in the arse for him. He doesn't really want to have to deal with that. Does Vinícius Júnior fit into this system of Xabi Alonso? I don't mean a tactical system, but the sense he has of, and it's been very clear by the fact that Arda Güler's played loads, by the fact that Mastantuono has played loads, the fact that under Xabi, it's completely different to previous Real Madrid in that it's a genuine meritocracy. Does he fit that? Does Vinícius fit that?
I've said this before, and I'm happy to go on record again and say it. Look, I think he's collateral damage in this team. I think he could end up going. I think he's the one person who can end up going. I really, really do. I think stylistically there's a few issues there, and there's just too many personality issues like this one. I don't know. He's a bit of a firework waiting to go off. What happens if it's a Champions League semi-final against Barcelona and it's, you're chasing a goal? What happens if they're 1-0 down to Barcelona in the second leg and Vinny suddenly just decides to go off? And he's too unpredictable. And when you can't account for things like that, it's very hard for you to plan and progress. And I just think he's more of a problem than than he is a solution right now, and that's a big issue that they have there. I have a lot of time for a bit of villain activity, but I feel a lot of the time it's more nuisance, irritant activity from Vinny, and it hampers his own team. It hurts his own team. Like I say, there's just any moment in any game he could get sent off or do something wild and it costs your team. Do you move forward with that? Can you plan with that? I don't think you can. It's probably something that Xabi Alonso has got to look at in probably next summer. I can't see him going in January. Probably next summer. They'll look at the bigger picture. They'll look at who's available. They'll look at how Mastantuono has progressed, how Arda Güler has progressed. They'll actively look and say, look, can we survive without him? I think the question is already yes. And it is. It's a tough one then, because he's had a lot of success. He's got an excellent record. He's been phenomenal for several years, but there's just too many doubts and too many question marks around him now for how he fits this team in the present and moving forward.
That's it, isn't it, really? It's about fit. And look, I know it's in an entirely different context, but we've seen Xabi Alonso do this before with Victor Boniface, who's his most talented attacker, I think it's fair to say, at Leverkusen, and he was prepared to move him on just to find a better balance in terms of the team. But obviously, there were fitness issues as well. So watch your space. I think it'd be interesting to see what happens there. I guess there's always a political element to it at Real Madrid. And if we talk about the politics, we have to, because the back end of this, it felt as if when it popped off, which really followed the Pedri sending off, which was like so unusual and almost Barcelona in microcosm in this game, because He gets the second yellow card, chasing his own bad touch, which we don't expect at all from Pedri, who's maybe the best in the world in his position, but it's really Barcelona's day in a nutshell, wasn't it? There was a bit of afters that followed that. It took absolutely ages to get off the pitch.
Yep.
And then there's this thing at the end where really the die is cast a couple of days before, where it's what Lamine Yamal said off the pitch, where he accused Real Madrid of diving and faking and playing the officials and that sort of stuff. And Vinny and who's obviously off at that point, and Carvajal both have a go at him and tell him to shut his mouth. Everyone gets stuck in. 6 bookings. Lunin, who's not come on, the reserve goalkeeper, he gets a red card as well. There's a real lot happening at that point. Firstly, how much of this is down to Lamine Yamal, and how much of it is like it feeling like Real Madrid have to mark their territory and that they're looking for this? Because to me, it's a little bit like, you remember in the Champions League, going back into the COVID year, going back into 2020, and Erling Haaland scores the winner for Dortmund in the first game against PSG and does the yoga celebration, and then afterwards the whole PSG team, led by Neymar, do this yoga celebration. You think, are you really beating up on this young kid there? Like, I know he's an extraordinary talent, but this is pathetic. It felt a little bit like that to the way they got in Lamine Yamal's face, because Carvajal's nearly twice his age, for goodness sake. You know, it's extraordinary, really, how you have that. How much of this is Real Madrid going, know your place, and how much of this is a learning experience for Lamine Yamal, or do you think it's a bit of both?
I think it's honestly a bit of both, looking at it. Look, Yamal's statements, look, he made them about the refereeing calls, about Real Madrid still complaining. It's something I think a lot of fans say. So, you know, Barca fans enjoyed it, the fact that they had a player saying it. But at the same time, if you are going to say things like that, you're going to be, you can use a metaphor to say you can't expect those words to be pinned up on the dressing room wall. You know, you can't. They just are. And when you have still got people like Dani Carvajal in the dressing room, then of course they're going to take issue with it. I guarantee if Real Madrid didn't take issue with it, they would have got a lot of stick from their fans and the press, because they said, why is nobody kind of like stepping up or standing up here, sort of thing? And, you know, doing it. Yeah, exactly. I thought it was a bit ridiculous and over the top from Vinny, again, the way that he swung around and what have you like that. I think that they're saying that Yamal perhaps said something about missing out on the Ballon d'Or to him. I don't know whether that is the case. We'll see in the next few days. There's a few Spanish football shows that tend to, you know, go in and lip read and things like that. So we'll see. So we might find out to see what was actually said. So yeah, but the general gist was that Real Madrid players were saying kind of like, go on then, Lamine, talk now, which is fair enough, and I enjoyed that. And I said on the preview show, so I said on Ask OTC this on the preview that, like, look, this game has become a bit of a drab and a bit rivalry, a bit drab. So I think it's important that it has like little things like this. So it was good to see. It was enjoyable in a way, a bit over the top from Vinny, fair enough. But yeah, Yamal got put in his place, and I guarantee he won't be doing any interviews with streamers for the next Clásico. He can bank on that. He might even end up having a social media cleanse or break. Yeah, the press office might put a block on that. Exactly.
I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I just want to say something on a wider point as well. And this is with Yamal. I don't know. I'm a bit wary, and he needs to be careful moving forward, because there's a lot of noise around him. I don't think he's being helped by his father and his mother, doing some strange things around his name off the field and what have you. He's obviously got a very high-profile girlfriend now, Argentinian rapper, I think. Somebody correct me if I got that wrong. And there's things like this, a lot of things going on off the field now for Yamal. And he needs to be very, very careful, because he's still very, very young, and these things can turn into distractions and problems very quick. And when you're not talking on the pitch, so when you've had a Clásico where you've not done anything, where you've been shut out by Carreras, where you've been moved from your wide role to the central role because you're getting clamped down out there so much, it's going to amplify the conversations around whether you're focused enough on your football and on your game. So he just needs to be careful moving forward, because that is an issue, I think, right now with Yamal.
Yeah, and I think it's all about perception. I feel like a lot of the criticisms of him in Spain are actually quite classist. They're quite similar to what Karim Benzema received, actually, when he made that move from Lyon to Real Madrid. In the sense of, you're just a kid from an estate, why don't you shut up and play? It is something that I think is a bit of an undertone to a lot of these criticisms. And I think it's easy to forget because he's so brilliant, that he's still a teenager. And doing stupid stuff is part of it. I think you're right. The entourage probably doesn't help that much. But if we're talking about entourage, from my perspective and your perspective as big NBA fans, it did feel like a lot of this dust up was like, especially when you get the players in street clothes involved, like Rafinha was right in the thick of it. As soon as Antonio Rudiger turns up on the touchline, you think, okay, right, it's not calming down from this point, is it?
Exactly.
So that's quite aesthetically pleasing. We've seen actually with, the attempt to have the game in Miami, and obviously Real Madrid players had their word to say that in the last week, as we were talking about in the main OTC last week. It does feel as if this is like quite a sort of a more off-piste sort of Americanization of El Clasico. So you know what, I'm here for it. Look, before we go, David, I just feel no one's going to throw this back in your face, because I'm going to make sure the production staff don't clip it and throw it back in your face. But if you were to make a far too early prediction, does this change how you feel about who's going to be La Liga champion, or at least put some doubt in your mind? If you had to go for one of these to win La Liga now, who would you go for?
Yeah, it's put some doubt in my mind. Absolutely. I'm still going to say that Barcelona will win La Liga. And look, the production team can keep it in. I'm happy to stand by my word. Look, and, we get things wrong in this game and we get things right, things like that. So yeah, I'm happy to say, I still think Barcelona will win the Liga. I just don't think it's going to be, the procession that some perhaps had it out for. And I think both teams are going to get issues. And look, I always say this, it's a very long season. Injuries will occur. Focus on certain European games will occur. There's lots of element to it. But yes, right now, if you're asking me, so yeah, I still think Barcelona will win La Liga.
Right, and I'm going to use the opportunity of being in this chair to duck the question entirely. We will come back to it in the near future, I'm sure.